You're gonna hear something today that's probably a little bit different and something that you might not have expected at the Iowa Cattlemen's meeting. Okay, so in this culture and time we live in, it's become kind of a thing to be politically correct about what you say. I'm probably not going to be today. All right, because I want to talk about something that's very near to me, that I've become very passionate about, and that's the business that I'm in and the business that you're in. All right? So I'm going to talk about this issue of stewardship. What's interesting is that there was a session earlier today, I believe, where there were some advocates. Is that right, or was that tomorrow? Where is that on the program? There's some young families. Is that tomorrow? That was today. Did you attend that? Okay. What's interesting to me is that in North Dakota at NDSU, they actually created a position for that very reason. Okay, it's the only position I know of its kind in the United States. So I am in that position, and that's what I want to talk about today. And what I want to do is equip you to feel comfortable about talking about some of the things that I'm going to talk about. All right? I've listened to others talk about being an advocate for agriculture, and the premise or the objective of talking about advocacy in agriculture is education. And I think that's very important, but what I'm going to do is dig just a little bit deeper. The title of what I'm talking about today is Stewardship, a philosophy of life, culture, and business. Because if all we do is talk about trying to educate people about cattle and educate people about food and the food that we produce, I'm not sure we're going to be successful. There's a philosophical side to this issue that is very important in being an advocate. Okay? All right. Other way, Raj. There you go. One of the things that I've learned about agriculture and the people in agriculture is that they tend to be very creative people. They know how to fix things and not have the right tool. They know how to fix an old fence without necessarily always having new barbed wire, right? They know how to put something together, and this is where the stories about baling wire and duct tape come in, right? And I think they're a unique culture of people. I don't think they're appreciated enough for what they do, right? So I got a picture here that demonstrates creativity. And for some of you in this room, you can tell me exactly what make and model of this machinery is in this picture, right? So that, and this is where I need that pointer, but that tractor way on the left side there, what model tractor is that and what kind is it? You know. Absolutely. International 806. What's it hooked to? What is that thing? Heston Stackhand 38. That happens to be the first one that was purchased in Griggs County at that time. What's next to it? What kind of swather is that? It's a versatile, actually. In my country, there was a lot of versatile swathers purchased because they were priced much more reasonably than some of the other higher priced ones. That happens to be a 400 versatile swather. When I was in high school, I worked for my uncles, and they had a versatile 103 swather. The 103s had a Wisconsin ensign sitting off to the right-hand side. So if the wind was just right and you were going a certain direction, you'd feel that heat all day long. So is the 400 versatile swather an upgrade from the 103? Big time. Big time. When I was in high school at the same time, we didn't have the Heston Stackhand. We didn't have the hay buster that made stacks in little round mounds. We actually used the old farmhand stackers with the buckers and put hay in a stack frame. And then when you're a young kid, you get the pleasure of packing the hay down in a stack frame. Okay, I hated it. Okay? So my point is that there's been a number of technological advancements in our industry that have made our lives easier, right? This is not modern machinery here today anymore, is it? But on the creativity side, why is this machinery parked the way it is? What's going on here? Is it just parked for the wintertime in this fashion? What is it? That's right. This is a portable corral, all right? And what this does is that it gives us an idea of the creativity of the people who live in agriculture. Where's the weak spot in this corral? That little Dodge Stratus isn't very tall, is it? I'd be a little worried about that little Dodge Stratus there. So, my point in sharing this with you, though, is that it gives us a good example of who the people are that work and deal and make a living in this business of agriculture. We're different. We really are. And that's the message that I want to tell other people. The people that live in Des Moines, Iowa. The people that live in Minneapolis and Chicago. I don't think they understand the creativity and the unique culture that exists within agriculture. I want to talk a little bit about philosophy. I want to spend a little time on stewardship. When you leave here, what I want you to do is being able to define with me what stewardship really means and how you fit into this role as being a good steward. We'll talk at the end about some solutions. Here's where this gets perhaps a little heavy and perhaps politically incorrect. But I will tell you that I'm at an age where I don't really care anymore. Okay? This is very important, and it's very important to what we do to understand this. I have two pictures here. One down here and one up here. This is the one on the lower left-hand side I took in the island of Hawaii. Beautiful country. Grant, I think I took these pictures when can't remember if this was our AVC trip or I spoke at the Hawaii Cattlemen's meeting one time. Beautiful island, okay? This picture here in the upper right I took coming down the hill in the Cheyenne River Valley one fall morning. And you've all seen how the fog kind of settles in the valley in a cool morning. Beautiful. Here's the two questions that we have to ponder because this relates to who we are and how we deal with others and how we deal with our livestock. Is what we see and what we're a part of, is it here by design or is it here by chance? We don't necessarily talk about this with other people, but when we're alone, sometimes we think about this. Was there a Big Bang Theory and everything just happened somehow to go into perfect order? Or is there a design to this thing? Okay? There's a follow-up question that we also need to ponder very carefully, and that's this one down here. Do you and I have a reason for being here? Or is nature totally indifferent to us? You see, I think there's too many young people growing up today that fall into this category. They think it doesn't matter whether they're here or not. One of the statistics that worries me today is the one of the suicide rate in young people. Is it because they don't understand their purpose in life? And I'll just tell you up front that I think things are here by design, and I think that we've been given a purpose. And those of us in agriculture are part of a very important purpose. And when we understand that, it changes the way we look at the world, and it changes the way we deal with livestock and with other people. The reason I'm starting here is that it's important to also understand that there's philosophies that are 180 degrees, I would consider, out of phase with what I believe and what I talk about. One of them is this one. This one has been articulated by actually another veterinarian. Michael W. Fox actually served as a board member for HSUS, which many of you would understand what those initials stand for. That's an organization that's not exactly our friend. But this philosophy, in my mind, is 180 degrees out of phase with what I believe. It says, he says, the belief that all life is equal because our planetary relations are sacred. Okay, I don't really understand that, but it leads to the inevitable conclusion that it is unethical to value one life over any other. Thus, the life of one ant and the life of my child should be granted equal consideration. Okay? Just as a side note, sacred means entitled to respect or reverence. So this kind of relates back to the last slide I shared with you, respect or reverence for chance? That doesn't make sense to me. That's illogical as far as the way my mind actually works. Okay? I read a book a number of years ago, again written by another veterinarian that was involved in sleep research in humans, but the model that he used was cats. Okay? And the Animal Liberation Front, this occurred in the early 90s, actually broke into his lab and released all the cats, and the cats eventually died and burned up or destroyed all of his research. But he made this statement in this book, and the title of the book is An Odyssey with Animals, 2009, Adrian Morrison. He says, one may create any world one wishes with words. The critical question is whether one would be willing to live in that world. So now let me back up to Michael W. Fox. He says the life of one ant and the life of my child should be granted equal consideration. So let's think about this living in a society, and let's just take this hypothetical scenario. Let's say I'm standing on the busy street, and let's say it's just out in front of this Holiday Inn, and I notice a young child wander into the traffic. And I also notice let's say a young dog wander into the traffic. And I can only save one. Which one do I save? Well, if they're equal consideration, if I give them equal consideration, I have to stop and think about it for a while, right? You see, I would argue that this is, to be polite, nonsense. A society cannot act and cannot function with that type of philosophy. It doesn't work, right? So my point is, our unique culture has been for a long time the dominant culture, the dominant belief system. There are times when I think we're at a little bit at risk of not being the dominant culture and dominant philosophy any longer. That concerns me. That's why it becomes such an important part of what I talk about and what you ought to talk about as well. Because I would argue that this is what we believed for a long time regarding the use of animals, right? It was written down an awful long time ago, and don't necessarily articulate it or talk about it, but we've believed this pretty clearly for a long time. That everything that lives and moves will be food for you. There was an article in Feedstuffs in 2014 talking about the same thing, talking about how man has authority over the animals. But with authority comes what? Responsibility, right? Exactly right. I put this in here just today because I've been thinking about this. What's one of the Latin phrases we've used to describe our culture? E pluribus unum, isn't it? What's that mean? It means out of many, one. What concerns me is today we're looking at out of many, manier. It seems like we're trying to divide ourselves more all the time. We want this group over here and this group over here, that group over there. It doesn't work. When it comes to the things that you and I deal with in agriculture, we have to have a common culture and a common philosophy that we follow. Otherwise, this does not work. Wayne Burkhart in Range magazine back in 2003 perhaps articulated it just a little bit differently. But I liked what he said. He said, rangelands and herbivory co-evolved as part of a natural system. Grazing is the fundamental biological process and part of the food chain. Grass evolved to be eaten, not just looked at, right? It's a renewable resource, grows from sunlight, water, and needs to be harvested just like a lawn needs to be mowed. Ranchers are resident caretakers of brush, grass, and grazers. And then he asks this rhetorical question in the article. Did God somehow make a mistake in making grazing animals? Okay, I don't think so. Don't think so. We ought to be very thankful for these ruminant animals that take a foodstuff that you and I can't use and turn it into something that's so nutrient dense and so good for you and so good to eat, right? We ought to be very grateful. By the way, I'll tell you that Range magazine is one of my favorite magazines. I just cherish it every time it comes. Okay. I want you to remember this definition. This is the online Webster's dictionary definition of stewardship. Not very long. We should be able to memorize this very quickly. It's the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. There's one word in there that I think is really significant. Entrusted. You and I have been entrusted with a responsibility, haven't we? And these pictures on this slide kind of give us an idea of what's our responsibility. I got this critter on the right-hand side here. That's obvious. I've been entrusted with the responsibility of caring for that critter when it needs care. Most of us in the beef cattle industry, though we kind of like these beef cattle because sometimes we just leave them alone, they take care of themselves pretty well. I also have a stewardship responsibility to this ground, don't I? Because I want to leave it behind in better shape than when I took over, right? There's something else we have responsibility to, and that's these. We have responsibility to the people that we come in contact with. I took this picture in 2008 in Uruguay. In the city of Montevideo, I was at an agricultural show, and these young grade school kids were coming through the sheep barn. And I'm pretty sure those kids coming through the sheep barn in Uruguay were pretty confident and knew full well what the purpose of those sheep were who were in those pens. They weren't pets, were they? They're there for food and wool and whatever else other use we can make out of sheep, right? There was no confusion. They weren't walking through the barn and talking about how it stinks in the barn, right? If we did this in Minneapolis or Chicago, would we get the same response? Probably not. And I'm not naive enough to tell you that I think we can turn the clock back on this. But maybe we ought to try just a little bit. I don't think we're trying very hard at this point. Kids are really our target audience. When you get to be my age, you're pretty well set. Pretty hard to change your mind, right? We need to demonstrate to kids what these animals are really and truly for. Now, in the country of Uruguay, it's a little bit easier. They got way more animals, livestock, than they do people. Okay? It's a little bit like North Dakota, Wyoming. Iowa's the same way, right? But we still have work to do in our home states, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. Okay. We have a stewardship to our consumers as well. They buy the product, right? So we try really hard to figure what consumers want. I'll tell you, it's a big task. I'm not sure what they want sometimes. They want what they buy, but what they tell you on a survey is sometimes different than what they actually buy, right? So what do they want? I'm not sure I can tell you, but I think there's a couple things that are important to them. I think for most of us in this room, and if everybody was listening in, which I wish they were, that we would recognize that food is pretty much a basic right, right? There's a lot of people around the globe that don't get enough food or sometimes any, right? But I think there's something that we have to think about, and that's this one right here, cost as a percent of income. In 1934, we paid 24% of our disposable income into the food budget. Today it's around 10%, but I want you to think about this, and this relates to the next part. If somebody's making $30,000 a year, does he spend more than 10% of his income on food? You darn right he does. Now, and I understand that these EBT cards have made a difference. People can use them and go in and buy whatever they want, even marijuana or something. I'm not sure, but that's another cultural issue too, by the way. We're not going to go there, don't worry. But if food is a basic right, we do in this country have a responsibility to produce food pretty not cheaply, as efficiently as we can, such that we have choices for people, right? In this country, we have tremendous food choices. And the more of the affluent society, the more choices we get. How many of you like to go into grocery stores? I never thought I'd like to go in them, but I actually like to go in them. The ones that are really well put together. How many of you have been into Whole Foods lately? Makes you want to buy food, doesn't it? Okay? Now, can everybody go in to shop at Whole Foods no matter their income? No, you can't. Okay? It's, in all honesty, it's kind of for the economic elite. It really is. Food's expensive in there. That's why we have Whole Foods and Sam's Clubs and Costco and other places. I'm grateful for the choices. It blows me away when you walk up and down the aisle and see you got 10 different choices of canned corn. Isn't that amazing? It's amazing. But I'm grateful for it. I really am. We live in a great country. I think that most people want to recognize that what we're doing is sustainable. Now, I will tell you right today that I don't really know what sustainable is, except that it means you get to keep doing what you're doing. I think that's one of the hard things about using that term. That's why I like this stewardship term much better. It implies that I've been entrusted with some responsibility, doesn't it? So I would say sustainability is just simply stewardship of renewable resources. I've put a couple comments after this bullet point because I think it highlights some of what I'm talking about up here. Many of you are familiar with Norman Borlaug and the comment he made regarding food choices. He says, while the affluent nations can certainly afford to adopt ultra-low-risk positions and pay more for food produced by the so-called organic methods, the 1 billion chronically undernourished people of low income food deficit nations can't. We always have to have that in our mind too, okay? And Russ Parsons in LA Times said, agriculture is a business. Farming without a financial motive is gardening. It is. That's sustainability. We have to stay in this business. We have to have a business that we can let the next generation come in and take over. Right? One of the things that occurs to me is that, and I don't think it'll ever happen, at least I hope it never happens. But let's say because of over-regulation purposes, agriculture somewhat goes out of business. Let's say the beef industry becomes somewhat like the sheep industry. Sheep industry is just kind of a niche market anymore. It really is. Okay? What happens if we lose the wealth of experience and wisdom and knowledge that's been associated with agriculture in this country for generations? Do you go to the textbooks and find out how to raise and produce food again? No, you don't. No, you don't. You can't afford to lose that experience and wisdom. You'll pay a heavy price. So what's changed? You know, I'll admit that these titles here I don't necessarily understand. I understand the baby boomer one because I'm part of that generation. But following the baby boomers, we got Gen X, we got Gen Y, and we got Gen Z. Do we all think the same? Do the same words mean the same things to people of different generations? They don't necessarily. Dr. Engelken and I were just talking about that old advertisement for Oscar Mayer wieners. If you talk about that to the Gen Z and Gen Ys, they won't have a clue of what you're talking. I even remember the little jingle that went on with that. You do too, don't you? I wish I were an Oscar Mayer wiener, right? Yeah. So the thing to remember about this, though, is that, you know, those of us that are a little bit older, we are right about what we think and about what we say and what we believe. These youngers are wrong, but you can't always convince them of that, right? There's 317 million people that live in the United States. 82% live in cities and suburbs. Is that a challenge? It's an opportunity. We've got a lot of work to do. That's why when I stand up here and there's only 20 people in here, I'm thinking, man, I'm not cutting it. There's too many people out here that don't get to hear this stuff, that don't understand what a unique culture agriculture really is. How we believe and what we believe in the use and care and responsibility regarding animals. They don't. We've got to fix this. That's why I need your help. Fertility rate in the United States is 1.8 children per couple. I've done my part. I have 4. Okay? 2.1 is necessary to maintain the population. Immigration is currently responsible for population growth. 27%, the fastest growing group is Latino and Hispanic. Do they have different preferences, food preferences than you and I? I'm a lefsa, kumla, krengla guy, right? Meat and potatoes. These guys have different preferences. 27% under 20 years of age, 12.8% 65 and older. It's a challenge. It's an opportunity. I want to talk to you a little bit about this because I think there are some things that are changing that are of interest to us and probably work in our favor. Now, I understand we're at the historic high cattle prices. I'm grateful for that. I have cattle of my own. My brother and I have commercial Angus herd and a registered red Angus herd, so I'm with you on the chores and the fix and fence and dealing with the days that aren't so good, right? But I want to talk about this a little bit because this is part of our end product, right? One of my friends, and who I follow quite regularly, is a lady by the name of Ann Burkholder. How many of you know Ann Burkholder? She's got a blog called Feed Yard Foodie. She's one of those ladies, she's about 5'2" maybe, 105 pounds maybe, but intimidating as all get out. Grant knows her. If she's up front here right now, you guys would be squishing down in your chairs hoping that she doesn't call on you, right? But what she does, she tries to tell her story all the time. She's a Florida girl, born in Florida, went to school at Dartmouth, had the unfortunate happenstance of marrying a Nebraska farm kid, and now she's running the feedlot near Cozad, Nebraska. But she takes every opportunity she can to talk about what she's doing. And she brings young kids out every chance she gets. And she says, I field a variety of questions. And this one question gave her some pause. A 5th grade boy asked, how can you get the meat off a calf without killing it? Isn't that amazing? She says you can't. The animal gives its life in order to provide us with nutritious food. Right? She asked these questions here in her blog. How has our society become so far removed from food production? How can we fix this? This is a 5th-year-old kid that's growing up in Nebraska. You might say, what the heck are they teaching in school, right? But how can that happen that way? We've got a big job. We do. There are some things that are changing, albeit slowly, on the dietary side. I don't know, for some of you who may have seen this, there was a British Medical Journal article, and this one cardiologist wrote a letter to the editor. And I've just kind of summarized it as best as I could. He says virtually all the truths about preventing heart attacks that physicians and patients have held dear for more than a generation are wrong and they need to be addressed. You know, some of us got a premonition of some of this stuff when Gary Taub's book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, first came out. How many of you have read that book? Fabulous read. It really is. How Americans got med-reat wrong. How we get fat and what we do with it. The Big Fat Surprise is a new one that I just went through. It's kind of a same type of book as Good Calories, Bad Calories. Okay? He cites recent research suggesting that the obsession with lowering a patient's total cholesterol with statins and a public health message that has made all sorts of saturated fat forbidden. They fail to reduce heart disease. What's happened instead with public health? Obesity and diabetes, right? Somehow we've gotten the wrong message, right? Something's wrong. I'm usually in a kind of a courteous battle with the dietitians on campus. When I get articles like this, I send them over right away. I almost never get a reply. Okay? We got some work to do. But some countries have been paying attention. Sweden, no matter what you think of Swedes, and I'm not one of them, I'm a Norski, okay? But Sweden has actually shifted its national dietary guidance on eating toward low-carb, low-glycemic food recommendations. It's become the first Western nation to recommend a lower-carb, higher-fat diet approach to eating. Isn't that remarkable? And they didn't base it on consensus. They based it on a literature review of 16,000 studies. What's happening in the U.S.? Well, not much. We're still stuck. In fact, the new guidelines are going to come out here real shortly, and I know the NCBA is working very hard to make sure we don't take another hit. Right? Here's what they're still recommending. In fact, balance calories with physical activity to manage weight. I'm just going to stand here and tell you that that's a physical impossibility, unless you're one of those persons that every day wakes up and says, I'm eating this 200-calorie thing, I got to go run for an hour. That's not how we live, do we? There might be a 0.2% of the population that lives that way. Most of us don't. Okay? They talk about consuming more of certain foods, which I'm fine with. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains. This is what I don't understand. Fat-free, low-fat dairy products. They taste terrible, right? I rode to the airport a few months ago in a cab. There's 2 veterinarians in this cab. In fact, Dr. Dale Grodelution was with me. And the cab driver turned back. He found out we were veterinarians. He says, how come milk is blue? What's the answer? What kind of milk is he drinking? Skim, right? It's the same color as water. I told him to start drinking whole milk. He'll like it a whole lot better. Okay? So that's not changing. I think it will. It has to. The evidence is overwhelming. Let me make this other point. We hear a lot about consensus, don't we, these days? There's consensus on climate change, right? I want you in this room to, every time you hear consensus, a red flag goes right up. And you think about, and you become very skeptical. I want you to think about these. These are a couple examples of consensus. Long time ago, the consensus was the earth was flat, right? A long time ago, the consensus was that the sun revolved around the earth, right? That's consensus. Be very careful of it. Those of us in the scientific community are supposed to be objectively searching for the truth. I think this is where consensus has got us in the field of human nutrition. I really do. Okay? Beware of the term consensus. It's not the same as truth. Oh, I got to share this one with you too. We talk about grass-fed and grain-fed beef. This is not anything new, I got to tell you. So one of my very good veterinary friends sent me this reference. This goes back to the book of 1 Kings, talking about Solomon and his diet and what he provided for dinners each and every day. He must have had a lot of people, I will admit that. He said his provision for one day was 30 cores, and 1 core equals 10 bushel of fine flour, 60 cores of meal. Now I'll admit that's a lot of carbohydrates. What else did he have? 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed oxen, 100 sheep besides deer, gazelle, roebucks, and fattened fowl. Here's your grain-fed, here's your grass-fed. What's that? Absolutely. Yep. And if they're stall-fed, what are they fed? More than likely they were fed grain. And more than likely they're a lot bigger than your grass-fed, right? Had to have 20 of them to fill the same bill as 10 fat. Be interesting to have done a taste test back then, or Warner Bratzler shear force test, right? By the way, I don't notice any asparagus or carrots or broccoli or anything on this menu. Not saying you shouldn't eat that. So let me shift away just a little bit from the food side. We get criticized, I think, from time to time that we simply look at livestock as a unit of production, right? It's an economic unit. Doesn't mean anything to us. If we lose one, we feel bad, and we feel bad because we've lost money. Is that true? It's not true. It's absolutely not true. I'm part of this deal too, and I've lost calves, and I've lost cows. I feel bad every time. And I'm going to tell you, this is probably stepping over the line a little bit right here, but I would argue that those of us in livestock, we take our philosophy in kind of from this. What man of you having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, doesn't leave the 99 and go after the one which is lost? See, I would argue that's our philosophy. We care about the one. Whether we've got 500 or we've got 2, we still care about the one. That's a philosophy that we've operated under for a long time, and yet I don't think our consumers understand that. And they should, because that's who we are. That's stewardship. And this little calf in the bathtub came to my house one evening. He was hypothermic, which means he was really cold. And he was vocalizing. And when they vocalize when they're real cold, I use a term called a death beller, because you know they want to die. And so we do some strange things, not out of economic reasons, but out of stewardship responsibility reasons. This calf was so cold, not only was he vocalizing, but the lenses of his eyes were opaque. He didn't have enough circulation to keep the lenses of his eyes transparent. Okay? And so I, as a veterinarian, quickly put a prognosis on this calf. Maybe he has 5% chance of living. And I will tell you another part of this story is that this bathtub here, it's not just any bathtub, it's a bathtub my wife uses. Okay? And it's on the second floor of my house. That all of that stuff had to enter into my head as to whether we're going to carry this calf up the stairs or not. The last thing I wanted to have happen is this calf dies in her bathtub, right? We did it anyway. It wasn't an economic decision, it was a stewardship decision. Now this one turned out okay. Did. They don't always, do they? This one turned out okay. We filled that tub up and down a couple times, and slowly the death beller went away. We were able to tube feed it, and by midnight that night it was nursing on a bottle. 2 days later back with its mother. I'll tell you, there is a downside to this thing though. This is a little heifer calf, and she's still in the herd, and she's like 5 or 6 now. Her nickname is Shivers. I don't think I'll be able to sell her. Okay? I don't know that she's the greatest cow in the world, but that's kind of who we are too. It is. We understand this culture, and that's how we act and live and breathe when we have livestock. They don't all make it though, and we deal with that as well. In 1999, I went to South Africa, went on a feedlot tour and spoke at their feedlot conference. I took this picture as I left one of the feedlots in South Africa. It was the Beef Corps feedlot. I don't know why I took it. I thought it was just kind of interesting. And supposedly this is a letter that was written to the American president at the time in 1855, who happened to be President Pierce. Okay? And I don't know if this is an authentic letter, but it doesn't matter. But I think it makes a point for us that this letter goes on to say that what is man without the beasts? And we might say, what is man without livestock? If all the beasts were gone, man would die from a great loneliness of spirit. For whatever happens to the beast also happens to the man. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth also befalls the sons of earth. What's that mean? Let me give you an example that maybe helps you to understand what I think this means. What's been your experience when a guy gets to be 80 and 85 years old and 90 perhaps, and he's been caring for cows or the feedlot business his entire life, and he says, I probably need to let the next generation have it, and I'll just move to town and sell the cows or turn it completely over. What's the life expectancy of that man or woman? Short or long? Short. Sometimes darn short, right? Why is that? Why would that be? It relates back to one of the first slides I showed you. He had a purpose in life, didn't he? Be careful about walking away from your purpose in life. I think that purpose we've been giving us keeps us healthy. I know there are days I live in North Dakota. Is every day just wonderful to get up and walk outside and do chores and thaw out frozen waters? No, it's not. It's healthy. I honestly and firmly believe that. So we need to do our part. Do we feed the world? Heck no, we don't. Can't. Does it make a difference whether the U.S. is in the business of agriculture or not? You darn right it does. When corn hit $8, there were protests around the world. Right. Okay? Some of you would wish that corn was $8 again. I don't personally, okay? But we got to do our part, and we can't do it necessarily through... I said earlier, I'm grateful for all the food choices that exist. But if we're going to do our part, it's not going to be just strictly organic. It's not going to be just strictly natural. We're going to have to use the technology that's available to us wisely in order to do our part. Okay? A number of years ago, when I was still a Pfizer, I actually listened to an online lecture on sustainability. It was given by, you can't see it at the bottom of the slide, it's given by the name of a guy by the name of Wes Jackson. And apparently there was a sustainability institute that existed in Kansas. I spent 12 years at Kansas State University. I never even knew it existed. It was over by Salina. But in this lecture, he makes this statement, and I just have to share it with you because I want to make a couple points. He says at the Land Institute, which is what he ran, he said there's a 16 by 16 foot shack that I brought from 30 miles south. My friend Leland lived in that shack on $500 a year for 29 years. That fact makes me awfully impatient with those who say they can't get along on $80,000 a year. Leland has more cultural capacity than I do. He reads a lot of books. He had a little car, Carmen Ghia, that he rode around in, and he had a way of thinking about his place in the world. He was kind of a gregarious hermit in a way. And then he talks about this Beatles song, You Say You Want a Revolution, which actually dealt with drug use, to be honest with you. So let's think about that. In Wes Jackson's mind, that's sustainability, is that if you can live on $500 a year and have some little house that somebody gives you and some little car apparently that somebody gives you, is that sustainability? If Leland gets sick, who takes care of Leland? You and I do. Who drills for the oil and refines the oil to put gas in Leland's car? Leland ought to be very grateful for those that make $80,000 and $100,000 and $250,000 and more a year. We don't function without people that make some money, do we? This is nonsense. This is not sustainability. But in some people's eyes, that's what sustainability is. You and I in this room all understand that this is not. I think some people have the idealistic view, though, that that's what this is. Those of us in agriculture ought to have a little garden, ought to have a few chickens and cows, and that's sustainability. That's nonsense. And I could use some other more powerful terms than that, but I won't, okay? Okay, so what are the answers? Here's what I think we've missed. I think that we need to re-engage. Grant, this is you. Grant and I are in academia. Where I think we misfired, even as veterinarians, is that we focused all of our attention on science. I love science, I really do. But it's hard to have a very meaningful discussion with someone that doesn't really understand science. The eyes start glazing over. You lose them quickly. Okay? I really honestly believe we need to re-engage in the disciplines of philosophy, and by that I mean what we believe and why we believe in it. I really do. That we need to re-engage in this whole animal husbandry arena, and we're doing much better today than we've done in the last 5, 6, 7 years. We're doing a lot of things in animal husbandry. Every animal science department at one time was animal science and husbandry. We dropped the husbandry because I think we thought it wasn't scientific enough. It's a big mistake. It really was. You and I need to engage with passion and articulate the purpose for which you've been chosen. Think about what you believe and why you believe it and what you do and why you do it. Be passionate about it. You don't need to beat somebody up and call them a name. Just about slipped. But engage with passion. Emphasize the creativity and artistic gifts that we have as a culture. How many agricultural shows, even I was at the Nebraska Cattlemen's last summer, out in the middle of the pasture, 4,000 people out there. Tent after tent of demonstrating the artistic creativities of people in agriculture, whether it's painting or woodwork or sculpture. It's amazing. It's part of who we are. I think it's why we're in the livestock business. Those things go together. Dealing with livestock is just not about science. It takes art to deal with livestock. I love this quote here from a guy by the name of Andrei Sakharov. Andrei Sakharov was the nuclear physicist that brought the atomic bomb to the Russian people. He says, "I've always thought that the most powerful weapon in the world was the bomb. And that's why I gave it to my people. But I've come to the conclusion that the most powerful weapon in the world is not the bomb, it's the truth." Andrei Sakharov was an atheist. But get this. He believed in the non-scientific guiding principle that governed the universe and human life. Getting close, wasn't he? Getting darn close. Yep. What's your mission statement? You got one? Have you written one down? I think you should. Really do. Should be part of your message that you tell people when you're on a plane with them, or you're having a casual conversation maybe in an airport, or if you go to the cities and you're sitting next to somebody in a restaurant. This is one that I put down with a little help. It's not long. I took this picture, by the way, in Brazil as we were leaving a ranch. I'm hoping that this young man here understands his stewardship responsibility to the land and the livestock and the people that he comes in contact with. I have a stewardship responsibility to manage and care for available resources, the land, the livestock, and my personal life while leaving behind a better place for the next generation. Let me just make a point about this, especially this one. You know, we can use words. Words can go a little ways towards convincing people what you believe. What matters a whole lot more? How you live your life. That's right. A number of years ago, and Charles Barkley, I actually like Charles Barkley. He can be really obnoxious at times and say things I don't agree with, but he usually says what he thinks. But a number of years ago, he was asked, this was when he was still playing basketball. He played college at Auburn, he played for the Phoenix Suns. They asked him if he was a role model. He says, no, and I don't want to be. What's the right answer? Don't have a choice. He didn't have a choice, did he? You know what? Neither do we. It makes a difference if we really want to bring the trust and respect back to this industry that we once had in a big way. It makes a difference how we live our lives. It really does. It'll convince a lot more people than it will just the words we use. This is a little bit corny, and I'll admit that to you right now because I put it down and I haven't shared it all the time because I thought, oh, come on. This sounds too schoolboyish. But I think there is something here. I'll be honest with you. I do. This relates to behavior. What's a livestock steward? It's one who demonstrates commitment to his family, to his community, to his nation, and to the industry. He's compassionate to those less fortunate. He's respectful to diverse ideas and opinions. Doesn't mean I have to believe it, but I'm going to be respectful. Okay? It's a leader. He's sought out by others. He's purposeful because we understand what our purpose is in this life. He's a problem solver. Doesn't blame others but looks for a solution and gives others credit. And I'll always be grateful for the blessing of livestock. A livestock steward is one that prepares for the future, lives in the present, but respects the past. Really does. I know I haven't been all politically correct with you today, but like I told you when I started, I'm too old to really care. And I don't know when this happened. I used to be what I considered, and some of you guys in the room will laugh at this, I thought I was a young stud at one time. I went from being a young stud to an old fart, and I don't know when that happened, but I've hit the old fart stage. There's no doubt about it. But it does come with some advantages. You don't really care as much anymore about what people think and say about you. Let me just finish up with this. I do read a lot of books, I'll admit that to you. I probably have at least 3 or 4 books going all at the same time. And I read this book a number of years ago. Some of you may be interested in reading this one. It was called Riding the White Horse Home by Teresa Jordan. It's 1993. And I grabbed this paragraph out of that book because I thought it typifies who we are. Now this is related to cow-calf, okay? But she says in this book, in this business of cattle raising, we exert our will. We take a calf off a poor cow and graft it onto a good one. We hobble a reticent cow until she lets her calf suck. I always chuckle when I read that sentence because all of you in this room that have had cows understand what's going on there, and you've never in your life used the term reticent, have you? You've used a much more appropriate word that not always is spoken in public, right? Reticent actually means stubborn, but that's not strong enough either, right? We midwife these calves into existence. We care for them. Sometimes we even risk our lives for them. And they're ultimately slated for slaughter. In this fact lies the essential irony of our work. No one forgets that a live calf is money in the bank, and yet a reverence remains, doesn't it? It does. It's who we are. It's part of our culture. Stewardship. John Bell in Hungary, she had a couple that she had named. We all do that. John Bell in Hungary and the calf in the cab of the pickup, I might insert in here, calf in the bathtub, are not merely units of production. Our connection to them is more than economic. Day in and day out, we confront the messiness of this business of living. I'll tell you this quick little story. This was in March. I was in practice in North Dakota, and I drove down to this rancher's place. He had called earlier. He had a cow with a prolapse uterus. All of you in this room understand what that is. So I drive out there. It's about 25 miles to get to this place. I drive in the yard. It's muddy. It's kind of raining, half snowing. The rain is dripping off his cowboy hat, and he walks up to the door. I roll down my window. The Gen Zers wouldn't understand rolling down your window either, would they? I didn't have electric windows. And he just looked at me and he said, "It ain't all romance, is it, Doc?" It's not. There are days when you wonder why you're in the business, right? You do. But it's our purpose. I really believe that. There are good days and there are days that are not so good, but it's part of the purpose that we've been given. It's important for us to understand that. If we live with slaughter, we live with nurture, with season cycles, with birth, and with death. I'm going to stop there. Thanks for giving me the time. I probably went a little bit over. I apologize for that. But I'll admit that when I start doing this, I can feel you're with me, and there's a little more passion that I end up developing just because I feel so strongly about this. And I think you should too, because we're all in this same business. And we have a huge we have a powerful message. We just need to carry this message. We really do. There's a lot of people that don't understand who we are. You and I need to make them understand who we are. I think it's a positive one. I really do. Thanks, Doug. I'll stop. I don't know if there's any questions or any comments at all, but I'll just thank you all again for at least for being here. Would like to have the whole room full, but you're the important ones because you're the ones that came. Thanks. Thanks very much.